The last several months have been really trying time in the United States and a very trying time for local officials. And right now they're getting not only hit with the pandemic, but also with protests, with riots, with looting, with arson. And over the next few weeks, the situation they face is going to get even more grim. And there are going to be a lot of questions asked, no matter what happens, about some of the decisions that they've made. And that's what I want to talk about in this video. When you're done, if you've liked this video, please give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate us hitting the subscription button. You hit the notification button and you'll know when new videos are ready. And please leave a comment. Let me know what you think or maybe other things you'd like to see me address. During the pandemic, many of our local officials, mayors, city councils, county commissioners, governors, played it really tough. If you violate this or you violate that or you go outside when there's a curfew, you violate social distancing guidelines, you try to reopen your business before I say so, nasty things are going to happen to you. Mayor de Blasio in New York threatened to get people out of the ocean. You could go on the beach, but if you went in the ocean, you were violating social distancing and putting people at risk, and you could be arrested. In Texas, you had the woman who tried to reopen her small business, and not only was she shut down, not only was she fined, she was thrown in jail. Actually hauled off and spent at least one night in jail before she was sort of rescued by the Texas Supreme Court. Now, since the protests have begun, these same local officials have played a very different game. They haven't acted all that tough. In many cases, they're actually embracing the protests. Some of them are marching with the protests. There was a great picture of Mayor Garcetti from Los Angeles marching with some protesters, most of whom didn't have masks on, and they certainly weren't social distancing. So suddenly, all these things that if you did, if you were the young people in Missouri who went to the pool, where you had the media saying, you're putting us all at risk, that your parents could die, your grandparents could die, don't you care? How selfish are you? Now, it's fine. You can go out and you can violate social distancing guidelines, and you don't have to wear a mask, and that's fine. The woman who reopened her business, ends up going to jail. If you loot a business, nothing's going to happen to you. In New York, you'll get arrested and they'll just release you, because there's no bail anymore, no cash bail. And, you have a very different image of what's going on today with these same local officials. The local officials where I live who were threatening us if we dared violate the curfew when it was being enforced, are not, doing the same thing to people who are violating the new curfew, which isn't being enforced at all. And that's fine. But, at some point, there are going to be questions raised because of the link between what's happening and the pandemic. After all, these protests are happening in the middle of a pandemic that we've been told over and over and over and over again by our officials, by medical experts, by doctors, by virologists, and by everybody else. It's just a deadly plague, and we need to do what we're told. Do what we are told. They know best. But do they? Now, over the next couple weeks, one of two things is going to happen. And you don't have to be a virologist. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be a politician to understand this. Anybody with a brain knows that one of these two things has to happen. We've had large numbers of people violating social distance guidelines out on the street. It's what somebody in an article I read called it a mass experiment. And it is a very interesting experiment. You have these protests going on in the time of plague. And what's going to happen? Now, as I said, one of two things has to happen. It's only one or the other. Either you are going to see, starting maybe this week or the following week and the week after that, a significant spike in new cases of COVID-19. We'll see a significant spike in hospitalizations. We may see a significant spike in deaths from COVID-19. That's the first possibility. The second possibility is nothing happens. That the present trends and rates just continue to go as they have. On the the most part, down. That we don't see a spike in new cases, at least not a spike that can be attributed to greater testing. We don't see a spike, more importantly, in hospitalizations. And most importantly, we don't see a spike in new deaths. The problem is, for local officials, up to the level of governors, no matter which one happens, there are going to be major questions raised about their leadership during this dangerous period that we've been going through. If it turns out that there's a massive spike in COVID cases, hospitalizations, and deaths, then the questions will be raised about the leadership of these local officials. What did they do about it? Why did they allow this to happen? Why did they look the other way when these protesters were doing what they were doing in the middle of a pandemic? Why were they actually, in some cases, we've seen it, marching with the protesters, like Mayor Garcetti, or making excuses for the protesters? Well, these things are very important, and they are very important issues. But, come on, a pandemic that can kill thousands of people can kill thousands of people. When those young people in Missouri went into that pool, they were threatening the lives of thousands of people, maybe 10,000s of people. If this thing gets going again and there's a second surge, maybe we'll lose another 100,000 people. That's the kind of thing we were being told by our leaders. But now we're being told, well, it's not going to be that bad, and we don't, we got these protests, and they're just, going along with it for the most part. But if there is this big outbreak, who's responsible? I've already seen one official say, well, if there is a spike in new cases, just blame racism, or maybe they'll blame Donald Trump. I don't know, but it's never them. But, that may fly with the far left. They may say, oh, yeah, it's just racism. There's another cost of racism in this country. But I don't think most people in the country here are going to buy that. Especially if there's another outbreak and somebody's parents are in an old folks home and they die as the second wave sweeps through. They're going to buy the idea that this was caused by racism. We're going to say this is going to be caused by the officials who allowed this to happen. Alternatively, nothing happens. There's not really a spike in new cases. There's no increase in the number of people hospitalized. Death rates stay the same or maybe continue to go down. Now, if that happens, that might even be worse. Because then people will start asking the obvious question was, what the hell were we doing locking down in the first place? If you can go out, if thousands, tens of thousands of people across the country, maybe hundreds of thousands, I don't know how many protesters have been. These have been large protests, large riots, large amount of looting, large amount of arson, but large numbers of people are involved. And if all these people can go out there and violate social distancing guidelines, and without anything happening, then the obvious question is, why were we bothering with a lockdown in the first place? If thousands of students at the University of Minnesota can protest in a small area and jam together in the protest to make their voices heard against racism and whatever, why couldn't they have been in class? Why aren't they in class now? The school I used to teach at is still not holding classes in classrooms. Everything's still being done virtually. They're all worried about what's going to happen in the fall, changing the organization of a semester and everything to get ready for that in case they have to shut down again. Why? Why did we have a lockdown? Why did we shut down our economy? Why did we put literally tens of millions of people out of work if it didn't really matter? If the protests don't cause an outbreak, then there's going to be these questions that they're going to have to answer. What the hell were you doing? Why did you adopt the policies you did? And they can blame the experts, and they will, I'm sure, along with racism and Donald Trump. But, they still made the decision. And then it raises the question about the experts. The experts, are they really experts? Or are they just like the rest of us, trying to feel their way through the situation and guessing? Except when they make guesses, 20 million people lose their jobs. Are they going to be held accountable for that? I don't have any responsibility. I can say what I want. I don't cost anybody a job. But the people who shut down the economy cost people their jobs, cost people their businesses, cost people their livelihoods, cost people their dreams. Far more businesses were destroyed by the lockdown than have been destroyed by the protests. Yeah, stores have been looted, stores have been burned down, many of them small businesses. But compared to what have been lost because of a lockdown, it's nothing. The damage from a lockdown was far worse than anything that's happened in these protests. And if the protesters can go out there in relative safety, and again, I personally hope that I don't want to see all the protesters coming down sick. That's not what I want. My hope is that nothing does happen. But if that's what it turns out to be, that nothing does happen, then there's going to be hell to pay for our political leaders. Because if they were able to do the protests like this, if they were able to mass in these areas night after night after night after night, why did we lock down? Why did we have to lock down? And these are the questions that they're going to have to answer. And quite frankly, I don't think they have answers for the questions other than point fingers. They can pass the buck, throw the experts under the bus. Well, I was given bad advice by the experts. Or they can blame racism, as some of them are already starting to do. Or they can, try to find some way, they always do, to blame Donald Trump. So as I said earlier in this video, one of two things has to happen. The protests are going to cause a major uptick in COVID-19 cases, an uptick that inevitably will kill people. Or it won't. And no matter what happens, local politicians lose. As I said, if it causes an uptick, they lose because they didn't prevent it. If it doesn't cause an uptick, then people are going to be questioning why we had a lockdown in the first place. Why did we destroy our economy? What did we destroy our economy for? If you can, in fact, put tens of thousands of people together, and it doesn't seem to make a difference. Now, we're going to find out which of those two things happens over the next several weeks. Maybe even starting this week. If you look at the times that this thing takes to germinate it, and you look at when the protest started, it should be somewhere maybe toward the end of the coming week that we may start to see an uptick in cases. Certainly by the week after that. But over the next, say, 3 weeks, if we don't see some major outbreak, expansion of COVID-19 cases, at least in the areas where the cities mostly, where we've seen these big protests, there are going to be a lot of questions that our local politicians have to answer. And it's going to be very interesting. I don't have a clue which way it's going to go. I don't have a prediction. But it really doesn't matter. The prediction I can make, it has to be A or B. And if it's A, local politicians lose. If it's B, local politicians lose. They're in a lose-lose situation of their own making. And there's not much they can do about it. And for the rest of us, we just have to sit back and watch and see what happens. And on that note, I'm out of here.